mouthful, isn't it? That is a mouthful. But I'm in the right place, I think. So thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Kenneth, for having me. Of course, I was still thinking about this Jay-Z thing. You know, I will hear about this for the rest of my life, but
Yes.
that's all right.
Sorry,
I still appreciate him as a poet.
You know,
and a writer.
listen in next week when Tiff and I just go on a Jay-Z bonanza, and you will probably have all the information you need.
I'll
There
take
you
it.
go.
I'll take it. That'll be my homework.
There you go.
Absolutely be my homework.
Yes,
Thank you for
yes.
having me.
Thank
Thank
you for coming back. Thank you for coming back. So, the last time you were here, we talked about some of the great work that you do with Pierce College.
Sure.
But today,
Mm-hmm.
we are here to talk about something a little different. What are you working on?
Sure. So I'm always representing Pierce College, of
Yes.
course, and I'll do my 30-second commercial and just reminding everyone of the great institution that I have the pleasure and privilege of working for. We serve working adults and really focus on aligning higher education with workforce needs and employer needs, and we do it well. So shout out to all my Pierce people and all our students and alum and faculty and staff. I think that today I get the opportunity to expand, kind of amplify the conversation a little bit. I'm always talking about career and workforce development, and so currently I'm working on a little project that has ballooned or blossomed over time, and it's really about the interplay of identity, specifically Black identity and business culture, right? So we hear about that, we talk about that just a little bit, but it's one of those taboo things that sometimes we reserve for the conversations we have with our good friends, best friends, spouses.
Sure.
You know, it's the after 5:00 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
when you need an opportunity to vent and to unwind, and you need someone to just kind of step into your space and let you know that you're okay. And that what you experience was not in your head, right? It's difficult. It's a little bit difficult. And so as challenging as that conversation can be, I think it would be irresponsible not to call it up, call it out, and create safe space where those conversations can happen. And more importantly, the healing can happen as well. So I'm currently working on a little tiny book that will be released in 2018. And it is a collection of writing, a little bit of everything that really deals with the 20 plus years I've spent in business, both nonprofit and for-profit, working predominantly with minorities, with African Americans, with Black men and women, and my brown sisters and brothers as well, who have been navigating business culture and running into the unspoken rules of navigating, right? That's the difficult part.
Yes.
That's the difficult part.
You know, I was just going to speak to this. As you were speaking, I started thinking about your background. And you really have been kind of waving the flag in this space for quite some time. Because if I remember correctly, you had a stint with Inroads, am I right?
A long stint,
Yeah.
almost a decade-long
Exactly.
stint. So yes, I had some time, 9 years that I spent with that organization, really working with minority students in helping them transition into business environments through internships that ideally would convert into full-time opportunities.
Sure.
Still connected to Inroads and to the great work they do in Philadelphia and nationally as well.
So, in thinking about, you mentioned a lot of the unspoken rules that I think work employees and career professionals of color kind of bump into in the course of their career. What is an example of one rule that you encountered I think maybe early on your career that no one really prepared you for, and how did you kind of figure out what the rule was and how to navigate it?
So we'll start with the simple stuff, right? The basic stuff. Early career is you are, and I think it happens to all of us, you walk into a space that, you know, for the most part doesn't look like what you're used to. And I'm particularly sensitive to first generation college and career students and graduates who come from families and backgrounds where maybe business culture wasn't the norm. So that becomes a little bit more difficult as well. And something as simple as lunch, right, and networking can feel insurmountable. In your mind as an early careers, you're 22 years old, you're going into the work environment, and you just want to eat lunch. When it's lunchtime, you just want to sit, and you want to sit with your friends, and you want to have lunch. And so it's lost on us sometimes that lunch is never lunch, even at work, right? And that networking opportunities are never about the food and about the conversation. They're really an extended interview. They're really an extended opportunity for you to connect with others in that organization and show beyond the competency, what the competencies that clearly you bring to the table, how you fit in that environment, right? And so I know that when I was just coming up, going into a corporate environment, actually, I loved having lunch alone, right? That was my thing. Let me just unwind for a couple, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm an introvert at heart, right? So at the end of the day, can okay. Laugh? I am. I really, really am. At the end of the day, are you still laughing?
I'm still laughing.
I am.
Just so, you know what? I think you're so natural around people, all people, and you have such a helping heart. It's hard for me to grasp those two terms, Uva and introvert.
Believe it, believe it. So that is in my most natural state. I am an introvert, and I really do enjoy quiet time, but I love people, to your point, right? Yes. So I love connecting with people. Lunch for me that early on meant time for me, and so I just wanted to sit in a corner and enjoy my burger, my fries, my salad, whatever that might be. And I didn't realize that my team was frequently going to lunch together. You know that, right? Those are the little tiny rules that are not in the employee handbook. Right. And so for me, it took me a little while to put two and two together and recognize that I was the outlier who was sitting in a corner alone or finding other people who I was more comfortable with.
Had the invite came and you shunned it? Or?
It did.
Okay.
It did, and that's the other piece. I think a few people made it a point to invite me in to sit with them, and I just thought, I just need a moment. Sure. The good news is I'm a good learner, as many of us are, and so after observing what was happening for a little while, I recognized that lunch meant something different. And I had a friend who became a mentor who pulled me aside at one point and said, I don't like to have lunch with a lot of people, but I recognize that you have to. In business, you have to. Lunch is part of, it's a corporate culture.
Was this friend a colleague of color?
She was not.
No?
She was not, but she was someone who I think saw something in me, came from a completely different background, and recognized that was a blind spot for me. Cool. So without making it about me, she made it about herself.
Okay.
She talked about the importance of joining the team for lunch and for outings and for social events and the things that were really uncomfortable. Now, 20-something years later, I can tell you that part of my hesitation may have had less to do with my introvertedness, and more to do with the fact that I was just uncomfortable. That space looked and felt different, and there was a degree of discomfort that I couldn't name, I couldn't call out. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it, so it was easier to sit in a corner than to join the rest of the team in social environments that did not feel natural to me, right? So I learned, and that's basic, that is simple. Fast forward to 20-something years later, and as I'm working with people who are a lot more seasoned and experienced, I still see that degree of awkwardness with a lot of people who I think are great at their jobs, but you pluck them, you parachute them into a social environment, you put a cocktail table somewhere, and they struggle. They really struggle, and part of it is sometimes we are the only one, right? Sometimes we are the outliers, and it's not something that you speak about, but you have to figure out how to navigate. So it's a problem that never goes away, and I think part of what we have to do is to be more intentional in how we educate. Certainly our traditional students or young people around the importance of understanding business culture, reading between the lines, because if it's not in the employee handbook, it's probably as important as what's in there.
Sure.
And supporting them along the way. And I think I certainly try to do that in the work that I do, but also through the work that I'm doing more creatively now and with others.
I have a personal question for you.
Sure.
And if you choose not to answer it, that's fine. But
that's a heck of an intro, isn't it? When I ask you a
question,
if you choose not to answer
that's
it,
cool.
That's okay. That's okay. But, all right.
Well, no, it's not even that personal. So I noticed that. So with myself, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime I get an opportunity to have my son tag along, I have him tag along because I want him to understand and not be intimidated by the atmosphere or the environment. And I noticed that Michael Robinson, I've been to several events, and his son is with him. And I really admire that. Now, I know you have two sons, am I correct?
I do.
Do you make them a part of some of your business endeavors?
Not as much. So my sons are actually listening right now. I hope they were listening. That was their homework. They're 10 and 14, Zion and Samori, this second. We live in Delaware. And so much of the work that I do is in Philadelphia. And so it becomes more of a distance and also the nature of my work.
Which one's the 14-year-old?
Samori.
He's gonna be driving soon, so he'll meet you in Philly. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna need that drink from the network. Why did you bring it up just to calm myself down?
Well, you'll have a designated driver, so you will be able to do that, right?
I like it. So it has more to do with logistics.
I got you.
But the good news is my husband, who also works in Philadelphia, is a business owner, has more control over his schedule. And so that is where we've integrated our sons. They tend to spend a lot of time in the studio. It's also fun. His job, my husband's job, is kind of cool, right? Mine is a little bit different for kids from their perspective. But we do expose them. I think it's important to expose your children as early on as possible. And we do a lot of it through his work. And now that my 14-year-old is getting a little bit older, I think I'll have a bigger opportunity to support him in that way. But I think that's the best way. It's experiential learning, right? It's learning by doing, and I think that's important as well.
I want to go back to something you mentioned, and kind of flipping the perspective. You mentioned how, as people of color going into into an uncomfortable, unfamiliar work environment where we might feel the desire to because we feel different and we feel uncomfortable, we're not sure why, we kind of pull off to the side. What responsibility do employers have and teams have to recognize, like, how do we shift, I guess not shift the responsibility, but kind of share the responsibility of bridging that gap to helping people across difference feel more comfortable in team settings or in environments where they might not be that comfortable or familiar?
So the word that comes up for me is intention. It's intention and inclusion as well. I think that while we have some responsibility to learn and to figure out how to do some of this and to come up with tools that can support us, and that can look like a mentor and a sponsor and a support group of people who perhaps have done some of the things that you want to do. We tend to lean into situations where we're more comfortable with people who are doing the same things. That's not growth. You have to stretch. So I think we have some responsibility, but to your point, I think companies also, if they're using an inclusive lens, then part of what they have to figure out is what are the barriers to people bringing their full selves to a workplace, and that is across all identities, right? So there's certainly, when we think about D&I initiatives, I think some companies are doing a much better job of that than others. I think it tends to be the case that when you have experienced this, when this has been your lived experience, or you're an ally who really has connected with someone for whom business culture is not the norm, then you're probably more sensitive to those barriers. And I think you're probably even better positioned to open doors, to encourage, and to be an advocate, to be the person that speaks and says, hey, if this group is going to wherever we're going, have we considered bringing whomever is not there? So I think that kind of intentionality is perhaps today not a requirement, but it's the kind of thinking that we ought to practice. And the closer you are to it, I think we tend to do it more naturally.
You know, just speaking about the inclusive side of the conversation, and Tiff, you're going to have to help me out here. My man from Maryland with the Trailblazers podcast.
Oh, Stephen Hart. I had a conversation with him tonight.
Stephen Hart is outstanding. He has a podcast called the Trailblazers podcast.
Trailblazers.fm.
And he had someone on, and I can't recall who it is. Stephen, if you're tuned in by any chance, man, hit Tiff up on Twitter or whatever. But we both know this guy. We met, and both of us think the world of him. But he had someone on, and they were speaking about, like, they described the inclusion piece so incredibly. They said, it's when you're in 7th grade and you go to the dance at the new school, but does anybody ask you to dance? Like, or you were there, you're in the building, but does anyone ask you to dance? And that was the conversation.
Sure.
And I just thought it was an incredible analogy and it just was so simplistic.
Sure.
But some of us had been there before. Like, yeah, I had a good time, but I didn't feel like I was there. Like, I really was ready to go home.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people do come out of corporate because they feel like they're on an island, even though they're in an actual company.
Right.
And that's just an interesting dynamic. I was speaking with Rachel Williams. She's the VP of Diversity and Inclusion at Yelp. And she was saying that, when she originally left Yelp, it was because she was, I think, one of 5 women of color, and she just didn't feel like a piece of the puzzle there.
Sure.
Now, she came back to lead their D&I efforts, but wow, and I said kudos to them because you found somebody that gets it, was willing to commit 100% by just saying, I'm gone, but then was strong enough to say, I'll come back to make a difference.
Sure.
And I just thought I was like, wow, that's an interesting conversation.
Sure. So I think you pointed to two things that resonate for me. One of them is this interplay, or the difference between diversity and inclusion, right? And I think many companies are now figuring out that there is
difference, right?
and diversity is exactly that. You are invited to the dance. That's it.
That's
it. You have the bodies. You can count the bodies.
Right.
And inclusion really is thinking more deeply about that. What does it mean for this person to be at the dance? You know, are we thinking about the music we're going to play? Are we thinking about what's going to make them comfortable? What's the food we're serving? You know, how do we meet them where they are? And so those are some very different things, some disparate things, I think. And better companies, more progressive companies are changing some of that. My second point speaks to the importance and the responsibility of those of us who get it to activate change, right? To decide how we might be able to make a difference in business environments that are not necessarily designed for us, or where, through blind spots or ill intention from time to time, organizations may simply not be aware that they may need to make some adjustments. And so when you have that lens, when you have that experience, I think it's important for you to come in with that perspective and challenge the norm, challenge the status quo, do the work. It's heavy, it hurts. And that's part of why I'm so committed to this work, is because many of us, I think, have been pushing, have been pioneers in a number of different ways, have been helping individuals kind of learn what career navigation looks like in our respective spaces. When you do that work, I think it's depleting. I think it's challenging. I think it's heavy. And I don't know, what's missing for me is the healing. So I keep thinking about this idea of identity R&R, identity reconciliation and restoration. Right?
Wow.
And so what I mean by that is, when you think about reconciliation, we're talking alignment. How do you get two different things on the same wavelength? It is important for us as practitioners and as people of color to reconcile our identity, who we are, with spaces that we have to go to on a daily basis, 9 to 5. That's a lot of time, and usually it's not 9 to 5, right? You're spending a lot of time at work. And so we have to align our identity with the work that we do and figure out why we're there, what we're trying to do. Does that environment, does that culture fit us? And if not, then what do we want to do about that? Are we determined to try to have impact and change things? Or are we thinking about using this as a rung on that ladder to do something else and have greater impact? Do we come back to that company? Or do we take the expertise and go somewhere else? So that's one. In terms of the restoration, and this is what I'm really passionate about, because Inroads was 9 years or so. Pierce has been 9 years or so as well. So things are going well. Things are going well. And there were other companies along the way. But what I've seen with both traditional students, 18 to 22, 24 years old, and with the non-traditional students that I work with today, is that everyone needs an opportunity to be restored, right? Because work can be depleting. There's a competency, the skill set, the work that you do, that's hard enough. But when you have that double consciousness, when you have to walk into work, and suspend who you are at the door and still do the work. When you show up at the table and people are talking about the work, there are layered conversations that are happening that you're listening. We can't help it as people of color, right? When conversations are happening, we hear the surface level things, and we also hear what's under that. And we're always looking for our fit. We're always looking for whether or not what we are receiving is really what it is. We can't help that, and that's historic. That's not paranoia, right? And so when you've gone through all of that and you're still producing, you can't afford not to, right? When you've done a whole day of that and now you finally have an opportunity to go home and reflect and think, you need to be poured into. And so what I know to be true is, while diversity and inclusion and equity initiatives, programs, and groups are helpful in a huge way, I'm a big proponent of them, there is still a big gap between where that ends and where our holes still exist, right? That filling space. And I think that's work that we have to own and take care of and call out and speak to in our respective spaces.
Wow, incredible. It's the Career Seeker Show live on WPPM LP Philadelphia. We're here today with Uva Coles, speaking career and identity. It's my understanding that you may have some excerpts from your work that you'd like to share with us.
I do.
Let's
I do.
put it on the
If
table.
you will indulge me for a second? It's not
absolutely.
Jay-Z. It's not Jay-Z.
But you're
Keep
waxing
going with
poetic
that.
over there. I have to say, I'm over
Okay.
here. I like my mind is blown because actually I'm working on a similar kind of just that framework of who you are and bringing, just reconciling to use your word, the who we are when we're not at work and who we are at work, and making sure that we can show up as whole people. So I'm just like, this is amazing. So please I don't want to take any more time. I want to hear this greatness that you have here to share with us.
Greatness, no pressure, no pressure. So I'll share with you a little piece that I wrote recently, and if you don't mind, I'll tee this up for just a second. I was able to participate in an amazing program that was sponsored by a number of organizations. It was called the Philadelphia African American Leadership Development Forum.
Yes.
So great group of nonprofit leaders, African American leaders, who came from different spaces, but at the end of the day, we had certainly an opportunity to receive additional training on competencies we needed in our respective areas of work. But what became most salient for us was the need to be supported, to have space that just felt safe, where you walked in and you could just say, this is what happened, and this is how I interpreted or received that, and how do I overcome that, right? So it just has been with me for some time, how that space is critical. So for them and for, I think, us, I call this salud. She will come today wearing knitted brows and a heaving chest. She will anchor her hips with hands ready for the inevitability of battle. She will tap you on the shoulder, or spirit will lean into your neck and whisper in her inelegant, childish way, girl, we don't belong here. She will invite you to run. But you will come today wearing steady eyes and heartbeat. You will anchor your hips with memory of wars already won. You will wear the unwavering stance of a time-tested warrior. You will cup her shoulders with loving hands and spirit. Remind her to steady her knees and back. You will point to ancestors, men and women flanked next to, behind, around, under you. Their unshakable will fusing your spine with purpose. You will smile back, sit. You will invite her to stay, join you. Sip, you will say, some well-minted lemonade. You will resemble old friends settling between the grooves of familiar front porch stoops, taking in the scenery, reminiscing on the good steady bones of ancestry, smiling, inviting tall glasses to kiss in victory, knowing that you, they, we belong, have earned a seat or two at the proverbial time-tested and warrior-won table. Then, armed with remembrance and earned stealth, and with your head lifted by memories raised, you will whisper to no one in particular, and to everyone, especially her, and to your mother's 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 memory. Salud. And you will stay.
Wow,
So a little tiny piece.
Little tiny, but
A little
very
tiny
heavy,
piece.
and that was amazing.
Thank you.
I'm just like,
So when you sit by yourself at lunch, you have time to write and write really well. So Uva's, she's not just wasting that time.
It was time well spent, right? It was time well spent at the beginning of the day.
Time well
wow,
spent. That's outstanding.
that was
Thank you.
awesome.
So this upcoming project,
Yes.
is it gonna read like that? Will it be?
It will be a little bit of
How do you
everything.
see it? Okay,
So
okay.
there are poems, quite a few poems. There are also short stories or a few essays that are based on data as well. And so there's a little bit of everything. But what I've done is I've really thought about some of the challenges I've faced, but more importantly, the stories I've heard from my students, from peers, from friends, from people who I've grown to love. And I've tried to kind of weave that into a collection of their realities that hopefully affirms and supports. And I think it's a mirror to reflect what you've been through, but also a hand on your back to steady you and support you and let you know it's going to be okay. And keep pushing, because what we don't do is wallow. What we don't do is say this is too heavy, this is too much. What we do is we get up, we learn, we remember where we come from. We remember the memory, right, of ancestors, and we remember, if I think we do the work well, is that when we have an opportunity to sit at the table of influence, we can have impact, right? So that we're there for a purpose, and this book is all about finding your purpose, finding your way, and finding it in the fullness of your identity. So that's the work.
We have, I'm blown away. We have about 2 more minutes. Anything else you got anything else over there? I can't see over there, but I'm sure you're not finished yet. Let's
Lighter, 2 minutes.
Let's do it.
All right. The magicians wave their entitlement wand to render her invisible, irrelevant, incompetent, and inconsequential. She shook, seeing her body dissipating under their unexpected spell, but then steadied her legs, arms, lugs, memory, raised her head, smiled, voiced her own story of skill, competence, spirit, her own abracadabra. Hearkened to ancestral strength, regained own, drew her visibility with the permanence of pens dipped into diasporal deep inkwells. Watched them wonder if their magical wand faltered or failed. Really, she simply remembered her own power, her own divine, determined, durable superpowers, her own unequivocal black girl magic.
Outstanding.
Amazing. I think that I cannot wait for this to be released, and because I'm excited to read it, and I think that it's so important that I think as women of color to hear from each other. And to do exactly what we don't have time to wallow, but we still need to know that our experiences are validated. We still need to know that I'm not crazy for thinking that what somebody just said to me was actually out of line and inappropriate, and that it made me feel some kind of way. And at the same time, I still now have the wherewithal to get back up and continue to be productive and continue to be successful at work. And I think that this is going to speak to so many people and to really to change the way that we support each other and ourselves. So thank you so much. That was amazing.
So Uva, how do our listeners stay connected with you?
LinkedIn. We were talking about LinkedIn a little bit earlier, right? So I am Uva Coles, so check me out on LinkedIn, and that's UVA. And on all social media platforms, but I prefer LinkedIn. So we talked about the interplay of those, right? LinkedIn is the way to go, but more importantly, I'm with you. I don't care where you are.
Gotcha.
You're with me. We're together. That's the work we're called to do.
Man, this is what we do. It's the Career Seeker Show. We did it again. This time we did it with Uva Coles, career and identity, representing lovely, I might say. Listen, Tiffany Southerland, you're the best, man. I really appreciate you. Will Martin, thank you so very much for riding out with us today and showing this to the world. We do this every Wednesday from 4 to 5. It's the Career Seeker Show. We do it live at phillycam.org, and also we broadcast live on the East Coast Executive Facebook fan page. So to all the listeners on those platforms, we appreciate you so very much. I'm just going to cut it right here. Yo, Gee, is it a wrap?
It's a wrap, Gold.
Yo, I appreciate you. Thank you so very much for tuning in. WPPM LP 106.5 Philadelphia. Mike's dead.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that was so good. I'm so excited.
I'm excited.
And I have I have so many ideas happening in my mind, like places for you to be. Like he mentioned Stephen Hart. His podcast it highlights Black professionals across every profession, entrepreneurs to people in corporate America, small business, everything. So I want to connect you with him,
Please.
and it might be if you would prefer